listening to the Power of Inspiration and Awakening Radio with Julia Griffin. To master a higher frequency for a new state of mind. Once you walked in a forest of splendor in which everything you did and everything you thought was aligned. It is possible at this time to begin to return to the old knowledge. Intuitive healer and manifester Julia Griffin is here to talk about this unique time in history when all sentient beings, animals, plants, trees, and the earth are intent on creating this change. The wolves awakened her to the most incredible light, which opened gifts and brought knowledge that she longs to share. You are creators, and you are born to be creators of beauty, possibility, and joy. Join Julia on a journey into a beautiful and magical world where amazing possibilities exist. Let us help open the door. The Power of Inspiration and Awakening with Julia Griffin starts right now.
Hello, everyone. I'm Julia Griffin, and you're listening to The Power of Inspiration and Awakening on Transformation Talk Radio. Stay with us for the next hour and let us help you experience a higher vibration and a new state of mind. For those of you who don't know me or aren't familiar with my work, I awakened with wolves. When I met a wolf, it talked to me just the way people talk, and they taught me to read the energy of the heart. And I can intuitively hear plants, animals, and people. I became an intuitive healer and writer as a result. And you can find me at onetrueself.com, onetrueself.com. Today's guest, Dr. Carla Manly, is a very special guest because we're going to be talking about imperfect love. I think before we even go into this, we all know that in every relationship, no matter how much you love someone, there's something that doesn't quite work. And the same thing is true about ourselves. But let me tell you about her. She's a clinical psychologist, life fulfillment coach, and an author. She has a clinical practice focusing on relationships and personal transformation. She helps others in the ever-evolving journey of life, which is how we want to help you today. And she's the author of Date Smart, Joy from Fear, Aging Joyfully, and the Joy of Imperfect Love. So welcome, Carla. I'm so glad to have you here. Why don't you go ahead and tell our listeners what your website is so they can find you and look at that while we're talking.
My website is drcarlamanly.com. Spelling of my last name is Manly, M-A-N-L-Y. And that's my website.
That's great. Thank you. So you cite imperfect love as a substance of most relationships, including the relationship with the self. So tell us about this and what's your description or definition of imperfect love?
In so many cases, we expect ourselves to love perfectly or to be loved perfectly. And my definition of imperfect love, I like to contrast it against divine love, which is a pure love. No selfishness, no emotional or mental issues or physical issues going on. It's just pure. It's exquisite. And we sometimes know that in places of stillness, in places of feeling truly connected to our divine, to the highest consciousness. And in contrast, we have other types of love that we often mistake for authentic, imperfect love. Our authentic, imperfect love will never be perfect. We are human, so we will make mistakes. We will forget appointments. We will say something that hurts somebody else. We will, let our personal history get in the way of hearing someone else. That's all normal and natural. But what imperfect love does, which is authentic, genuine love, it learns from these experiences. It learns to say, I'm sorry, I want to look at this, I want to grow, I want to evolve, I want to do better. I want to take my errors in life and not use them to shame and blame, but I want to have a growth-oriented mindset. And so let's contrast it against what I often see, which is either a toxic love or a false love where someone is claiming to love us, but they are perpetuating negative habits and engaging in certain thoughts, behaviors, mindsets, actions that are actually harmful to the self and to the relationships, all the while saying, but I love you so much. I can't do without you. I love you. You're my partner. You're my child. You're my parent, but I love you. Yet they're currently continuing to cause harm. And that's toxic or false love that we often grow up believing is genuine love, but it's not.
Okay, so let's start with, when we're still, and probably most people who are listening to this meditate, we feel universal, unconditional love.
Mm.
And that energy loves us exactly the way that we are. And it sends us the perfection within us. But when we're in a relationship, I mean, I know I've certainly done it. I hear my parent, or I think about, you can't do that. You have to do this, which is control. And we all have those things. Another thing I'm going to list, because I see this a lot, is people will say, I met this person and it feels like I've known them forever. I'm like, you have known them forever. You have a soul contract. But just because you know each other from other lifetimes doesn't mean you're going to have a good relationship, because you probably have times that you hated each other, times that you did things with each other. My suggestion is, if you met someone that you had had a really good future with, and they were coming into your life now, what would that feel like? Because you wouldn't have the past life memories.
Absolutely. And there are times where we do meet someone, and I've done it, myself, whether I meet a woman and I go, oh my goodness, grandma energy. She can be younger than me, or
Hmm.
sister energy, or uh-oh, toxic energy. And,
Right.
and we can sense it with our eyes closed. We can do that with romantic partners. And we often believe that because we sense that connection, that it must be real love. It
Right.
must be our soulmate. But there are many times where that connection is something that is toxic,
Hmm.
a bond or a contract that isn't going to work out this lifetime. Maybe there's a lesson there. There usually
Right.
is a lesson, and it's figuring out that lesson. Is that lesson for me to have stronger boundaries? Is that lesson for me to understand the difference between infatuation and love?
Hmm.
What is the lesson for me? And it's not always going to be that long-term romantic relationship that you might have in your mind's eye.
Yeah. And I think that's a funny thing about both men and women. It's like you meet someone you like, and the first thing both persons think is, what would it be like to be with them forever? It skips what it's like to have the same kind of lifestyle and habits and compatibility a lot of the time.
And that's the piece that I really focus on in The Joy of Imperfect Love, my fourth book, the one that just released. It's that we want to start with the self. The self will never be perfect. Of course, we want to learn to evolve. And one of my taglines is, you don't need to love yourself perfectly to love others well, because we won't love the self perfectly, but we do want to be on a journey to know the self and love the self. And then if we are in that place of really loving, then we can pay attention to the other person who's come into our lives or is in our life, and be able to say, oh, this person is showing up, and this is what I am meant to learn. These are the boundaries I need to set. These are the voices that I hear in my head that my partner is, or our interactions are triggering. My partner is reminding me of my chaotic mom or my hypercritical dad.
Hmm.
We can begin to look at those messages inside the brain and create change in the here and now. And that is such a beautiful part of the journey, because then we take the growth from here in the self and we start, it's this alchemy. And I love the concept of alchemy, taking the lead and turning it to gold. And We don't do that necessarily on the physical plane, turning lead into gold, but we can do it on the spiritual plane, on the emotional and the mental plane as well, to take these hiccups in relationships and use them to go through that fire, the alchemical fire,
Mhm.
into gold.
I'm going to say one technique I've used that works really well, and it's easy, is send light to the part of yourself that's sabotaging or upset or critical, because that part of you wants attention, because it really wants to integrate with the other parts of you. And I'll give everyone a great example. I have dyslexia, and almost all good intuitives have it. But when I'm tired, I can't write down a telephone number correctly, and I misspell things. And I'm just like, it's okay. That's just part of who I am. It also makes me see life from a completely different perspective than most people. And I had to do math and science and most things my own way. I couldn't do it the way that it was taught. And that gave me a sense of self.
Absolutely. And when we look at what other people might call our frailties or our weaknesses, absolutely, they might not look like what other people, and that's where we get into this comparison that becomes so toxic. Because if
Right.
we compare ourselves to some idealized other, we're not leaning into that part of the self where we want to give ourselves some grace. Like you said, we don't all learn the same way. I know I learn differently than other people. I will never be a mathematician. I like my calculator better than, it's not, but we want to focus on the areas, know what our areas of not super strength will be, and then look at the areas where we are really strong, lean into those. And as you say, there are people, you have dyslexia, yet the opposite side of that is this great gift of intuition.
Mhm.
And I look at that in myself. I'm extraordinarily sensitive and was told all my life, as many people are, you're too sensitive, you're too sensitive. And I had to learn to take that sensitivity, which is my superpower, what makes me a great clinical psychologist. It's what makes me a great partner and a great friend, is I pick up on other people's what's going on for them. And I've learned to cultivate the internal strength that doesn't make me take on their issues usually, but
Right.
actually be able to be there for them and create that sacred container that is the prize, the hallmark of sensitivity, something that our culture still tells us that we want to get away from. We don't want to be sensitive. We want to be rational. And I'm a big believer that we can make friends with both worlds.
I think so too. And I don't think anything's the matter with the sensitivity if you learn to read what's making you have a reaction.
Absolutely. And I love thinking of, for some people who are maybe out of touch with what their superpower might be, I often say, go back to your childhood. Go
Hmm.
back to your childhood, to the fairy tales that you liked to listen to or have read to you or read again and again and again. And I know for me, I didn't understand it, but two of my favorites were Princess and the Pea.
Hmm.
My other favorite was Ugly Duckling. And Princess and the Pea, the message was, of course, you're very sensitive. So you can
Right.
have all of these mattresses between you and your body, you and your psyche, and you will still find that pea. So learn to find the pea, what is rubbing you wrong, and make the most of it. And the other one was the ugly duckling, because I was born the ninth child in a family of 10, and I never felt like I fit in. I was very
Hmm.
different. And back then it made me feel like the other, the unwanted. But then when you find your soul family in this world,
Right.
it's not your DNA family, then you say, ah, now I'm home. And I think we can all do that. It's one of my favorite parts to work with on people, is finding that place in themselves and in the world that feels like home.
And I think too, I say to people, when you first start on your spiritual work, you're going to feel lonely
Mhm.
because it makes you different from everyone else. But just about the time that you accept the loneliness and you say, I don't care. I want this enough so that I don't care if I'm different and I have to live a different life. That's when you start to meet your soul family.
Thank you for pointing that out because it's so true and often something that we don't pay attention to. We don't talk about it enough. That in that, sometimes as you're individuating, getting away from the herd that may not feel right to you, there is that dark night of the soul. Or maybe more than one dark night of the soul where you feel very alone and adrift. And it's when you go through that, come out the other side toward where more of the gold is. And I remember I didn't find my soul family until I was in my doctoral program. And I was at my university and I met people who were familiar to me. I'd never met them. I was like, oh, soul,
Mhm.
and it knew. And it was so wonderful because I felt as if I was finally at home. And that is one of the greatest things that we can hope for as we go on this journey in life, that we learn to love the self imperfectly, to go out on our journey, whatever that journey is, to find out really who we are and start, as you were saying earlier on, find all those parts in the self, because often we breathe into one or two.
Right.
A great daughter, or I'm a great producer or a great parent, and those are all important. But we forget about all of the other parts that we want to be able to breathe into: our sensitivity, our joy, our sadness, our creativity, all of the different roles that we can come to embrace throughout life.
And I think also if you're different, you've got to embrace that. And you're probably, if you're listening this far, you're probably different. You don't have to worry about that, but think about how are you different and start making that a good thing.
Absolutely. And it is our differences. And that's what I love about the joy of imperfect love. It's never when we try to conform to society, whatever, whomever is dictating the right way to be at any point in time, we suffocate the soul. And that's what I keep saying to people is perfection, the pursuit of perfection suffocates the soul because we no longer feel safe breathing into who we are and being different. And I remember
Mhm.
one time I was at an event and somebody was describing me and I overheard and they said, "Oh, she's very quirky." I went, "What does that mean?" And I thought about it afterward. A part of me was a bit offended, but then the other part was like, I think I like being quirky. I
I
like
think so
being
too.
that way. And instead of staying with feeling offended, I decided to lean into it. And I thought, hey, whatever somebody's seeing, it's just me. It's who I am. And if it's quirky, that's pretty cool. So I redefined it in my
Mhm.
heart and soul to say, like you said, I learned not to care.
Yeah.
As children, we learn very much to care. It's how we're socialized to fit in, so we're not bullied, so we're part of a group, so that we're safe. That herd
Yeah,
mentality.
that we survive. You have to fit into a certain number of your parents' rules to survive.
Yes, and that survival mentality, it actually comes at great cost, but we don't know it then. We
I
don't
know.
know it, and we often don't have the strength early on in life I know I surely didn't. I tried
No,
to do everything I could to fit in.
I did too.
Because it meant that we were safe. And it's one of the most wonderful parts of getting older when we start realizing we often can be role models for what it looks like. Not that we set out to be role
Right.
models, but we realize people are saying, "Oh, you are light," or "Oh, you walk your own, to the beat of your own drum." Or it's like, yes, but I had to learn to do that. And I don't want your journey to be quite that difficult. I want
Mhm.
you to be able to embrace your journey with joy and knowing. And that's one of the things that led me to write actually my first book, the Joy from Fear, because I had lived a life that was very prescribed for.
Mhm.
So I grew up in a Catholic family where every I was dotted, every T was crossed. Perfection was the name of the game. Children are seen and not heard. And it wasn't until I truly woke up, you know, decades into my journey and saying, I can't do this anymore. I don't want to do this anymore. There will be a great cost to setting out on my own. I will
Yeah.
lose people who say they love me. And then I realized that it was fear that had held me back all the time. And here I thought I was this brave, courageous person, but it was quite a comeuppance when I realized that I had lived in a place of fear for decades. And then in my doctoral program, I actually did my research on fear, qualitative and quantitative analysis of fear, and was amazed but not amazed at how fear, the more fear there is, the less life satisfaction there is. The more fear
Right.
there is, the more immobilization there is. The less fear there is, and I'm not talking, realistic fear of a tiger or fear of a bear when
Yeah.
you're out hiking. I'm talking about the fear that tells us we won't be loved, we won't be accepted if we are true to who we are.
Well, in school, everything in life teaches you to motivate yourself with fear. You're going to go to hell if you don't act a certain way. You're going to flunk if you don't act a certain way. The whole thing is that I'll find myself doing that. Like, well, what if you don't do this? What's going to happen to you? And I'll think, well, probably nothing good if I keep trying to motivate myself this way.
Absolutely. And when we use fear as a motivator, which we naturally seem to do when we have children, right?
Right.
How most of us were raised with some sort of fear, some sort of consequence,
Yeah.
some sort of punishment. And research shows it will work in the short term, but in the long term, what works best is attuning to someone, leaning into someone, seeing someone, rewarding someone, ignoring the negative behavior when possible, reinforcing the positive. And that is truly the journey of imperfect love, because I come from the attachment paradigm, even though I'm definitely a depth psychologist. It's very Jungian oriented, but I have come to really embrace the paradigm of attachment, which is all about attuning to the self, attuning to other, that allows us to feel securely attached to ourselves and to the people in our lives. And that's really a big part of where I come from, is learning to be secure and safe within myself, no matter where I am. And it's a work in progress.
Yeah. But there's always a new stimuli.
Yes, there's always something.
Yeah. There's always something that you're reacting to that you kind of have to talk your way down. So, to go over some of this, we all have like a personality imprint that probably attracts us to a certain person or certain circumstances. And then when people get into that, they measure their success by, let's just say, the size of the house, the amount of money. But that's really limiting, and it really takes you away from your inner self. You evidently you wrote, I think, 2 or 3 case studies on that in your book.
Yes, and I've really seen that so many people in our society, we've just had these reports from 2024 saying there's a happiness decline, especially in the US. We are now
Mhm.
out of the top 20 happiest countries in the world. And when we look at that and say, what is causing this? I think so much of it is our pursuit of external success. And now we add social media to the mix, where we're looking at social media and people spend hours on it every day. They're doom scrolling, they're comparing themselves, their lives to the perfect beach body or the perfect couple or the perfect dinner. Oh my God, that would be an exhausting way to live.
Mhm.
And I think that we want to be able to see that when we orient toward what gives us true joy is never going to come from having the shiniest thing every day, the newest shiny product. It is going to come from shining the self, polishing the self, loving the self. That's what it's not going to come through an external purchase. It's not going to come through more alphabet soup behind your name or another degree. That has nothing to do with happiness.
No.
What happiness, I really believe, Julia, that it is Happiness is something from outside the self. Whereas if we learn to cultivate joy,
Mm-hmm.
one of our 5 basic emotions, it is one of those. I see joy as this beautiful votive candle, right? This beautiful votive that lives inside of us. It's there the day we're born. And life tends to, we have traumas, we have difficulties, and it tends to build up a sort of gray soot around that. And so
Mm-hmm.
we think, oh, I'm not happy anymore. Well, if we learn to wipe off the soot by doing psychotherapy, meditation, mindfulness, some beautiful practices that allow us to stay in touch with the joy.
With
And
just universal source.
oh, absolutely universal source.
Yeah.
And I think that's the beauty of meditation.
Mm-hmm.
If you're meditating and in whatever way works for you, that's what connects us to divine. That's what connects us
Okay.
to
Let's
source.
stay with that thought, and it's time for us to go to break. I'm Julia Griffin at One True Self, onetrueself.com, and I've been talking with Dr. Carla Manly about imperfect love and how to love our imperfect self and others in relationships. So we'll be back in just a minute. Stay with us. Hi, everyone. We're back. I'm Julia Griffin at onetrueself.com, and I'm talking with Dr. Carla Manly. We're going to talk about some cards and exercises and a little bit about being an empath and being in love. So I'm going to skip to the thing that I know I have thought so many times, and I'm sure all of you have too. When someone's not nice to you and they step over your boundaries, we all tend to think that if we're more loving, if we're kinder, and if we're nicer, everything will work out. I'm sure you've learned, as I have, that doesn't really work. We need boundaries, but I'm going to let Dr. Carla tell us about that.
It's such a common way of looking at life, especially for people who identify as female, that women aren't raised to be kind, nurturing, loving. And so if we have someone in our life who's being forceful, particularly if they're more on the narcissistic end of the spectrum, they can keep making demands. So we go into the appease phase and we say, okay, let me pacify you. Yes, what can I do for you? Let me smother you with kindness and joy and love. And for someone who believes in reciprocity and who is emotionally intelligent, they'll get it and they'll lean into you and they'll reciprocate and they'll love you and they'll attune to you more. However, for someone who's toxic or not emotionally intelligent or on that narcissistic spectrum, they may actually take advantage of it and just make the situation worse and worse and worse. And then you end up in this cycle that's somewhat abusive because you're doing, and they're not doing, not doing, not. So you've created this unconscious cycle of reinforcing the negative behavior. And I am with you. Boundaries are the key to that. And when someone is it's not that we don't want to be kind. It's
Right.
that we want to set our boundaries, as I say, with courage, respect, and honesty. So if somebody's taking advantage of you or not hearing you, and you're saying no, or this doesn't work for me, or I feel hurt, it is absolutely appropriate to, instead of trying to appease them, to say something like, I feel really disappointed when I'm asking you to make eye contact with me during our discussion and you keep looking at your telephone. In the future, if you're not going to look at me when I'm talking to you, I'll just, exit the room and go do some meditation. And I will tell you that the more you repeat that, it may feel very unfamiliar at first, but the more you repeat it, you're not reinforcing the negative behavior. And then you're not engaging with that person. Instead, you're engaging with yourself and an act of loving kindness. So that's what we really want to learn, especially if somebody is talking to us in a toxic way or criticizing us. Kindness won't fix that.
No.
What will fix it is kindness to yourself and
Hmm.
having that boundary and saying, I feel really angry when you talk to me disrespectfully, I'm going to exit the room. I'm going to take myself for a nice walk around the block. If you can converse with me in a kind way when I return, we'll finish the conversation. And having that courage and that tenacity and that kindness and respect for yourself, it does ultimately create healthier dynamics in the relationship. And if the other person doesn't respond, well, you might need to have boundaries that mean really stepping back from that relationship.
I agree. I was going to say people either respond to that and they become better, or they withdraw and they're not so interested in the relationship. It's going to be one of the two.
Yes. And especially if you're talking about someone who's more toward that self-absorbed and the more not calling anyone or that they are narcissistic, but saying, hey, there's a spectrum of narcissism, and on one end is very unhealthy, and as you get toward that end, it's narcissistic personality disorder. And for someone who's not interested, it often means there's a high level of narcissism, and they will walk away
Yeah.
because you engaging with them feeds them. It is that narcissistic supply. And so when you detach and don't lean into that negative behavior, they often say, oh, this is not interesting anymore. I'm going to go find somebody who will get really reactive by me
Yeah.
doing.
Yeah. You don't have any buttons left for me to punch. Bye.
Yes, and that's actually when you get used to that it's a lovely exit signal. You can actually really congratulate yourself on a job well done.
And so that's another learning curve. And what you're saying is accepting our imperfection. Like I like to overgive, so I have to watch that all the time.
I'm the same way. And I was actually, Julie, I love that you brought that up because someone brought that to my attention and I didn't even realize it. It was just, I'm such a nurturer and a giver. And we were having a dinner party and I was up and down and running and doing this. And someone took me aside afterward and said, is this how you are all the time? I didn't even see you eat a bite of food. You were, and I was like, well, yeah, this is how I was raised to be. And I went, oh, I get it. And it was just that one epiphany years ago where I realized, oh, this programming from childhood has left me so attuned to everybody else's need for water, salad, more this, that, whatever it is, that I actually don't even have a chance to enjoy conversation or a meal or, a cup of tea. So we do want to not blame or shame ourselves, just look at our programming.
Yeah, and I'll just say from a metaphysical standpoint, there's a really good reason that we feel this way. We just came out of a 2,000-year cycle when it was actually more blessed. We got more energy for giving away too much. But now we're in the Aquarian age and it's supposed to be balanced. And I went through a couple years of saying, I'm going to give to this person and this person exactly as they give to me. In other words, I'm not going to make or buy gifts for them all the time. If they're generous with me, I'll be generous with them, however they are. And the interesting thing about it was that the relationships actually got better.
It's beautiful that you're bringing that up because had you told me that 10 years ago, I would have said, oh, that's engaging in withholding. Well, no, it's what you're engaging in is reciprocity. You're
Right.
saying and that's how the scales work, right? The scales of justice, everything likes to be balanced. And so if we're giving, and somebody is non-responsive or indifferent or taking it for granted, well, absolutely, we want to pull back and use our energy in places where, not that we want to be appreciated to elevate the self, but if we're giving, and the other is not appreciating, it's that old saying of don't cast your pearls before swine. It's not that swine are bad. It's just
No,
that pearls are very precious and we want to be putting our pearls where they're appreciated, not where somebody treats them like slop.
exactly. So I wanted to ask you, I think you have an exercise, the first exercise that you wanted to share with our listeners so they can do this.
Yes, this is one of my favorites. It's a very simple one from the book, and I'll read it. It says, "The impact of love in my life." And this is part A. And here's the prompt. Are you realizing that love is incredibly complex and that it affects you in often indescribable ways? Remember, it can be beneficial to use a journal to chronicle your progress. Strive to be patient with yourself and embrace a judgment-free mindset that is filled with loving compassion. So that's the prelude, and here's the exercise. 1. How did my father's love-related attitudes and behaviors affect my life? Prompt 2. How did my mother's love-related attitudes and behaviors affect my life? And when we look at those two prompts, and I'll add in a third that's later on, what is your definition of love? And when we look at those three independent of each other, and we ask ourselves, because now we're looking at our programming, we're looking at the, soup that we grew up in, and we can say, oh, my father, and I hear this from so many of my clients, my father ignored me because he was focused on success. So I learned that love is being ignored by the man in your life. From my mother, I learned that love was, and this is a very common one, conditional. If I was good, she loved me. If I didn't do whatever she wanted, she didn't love me. So we can look at those, whatever we've learned, we can look and say, oh, how interesting. Is that still at work in my life? Does my father's programming still affect me? Am I okay being ignored for someone who's pursuing success? Do I allow myself to take second, third, fourth place? My mother's programming, the conditional love programming. Of course, there are so many forms of programming. Everyone will have their own. And it might be, oh, do I feel as though I'm not lovable when I don't do a good job on something? Am I always chasing love because I'm imperfect? And then we can look, so just those two questions start taking us deeper and deeper. And then when we look at what is my current definition of love, we can look at that without judgment or blame and say to the self, am I still, so for me, if you ask me, Carla, what is your definition of love? My definition of love is attuning to myself and to others in a kind, respectful, and caring way, right?
Yes.
Very different from what I grew up.
Mm-hmm.
And so we can see with my current definition of love, it would be very different from the way I was programmed by both my mom and my dad.
Right.
And so we want to be able to move through these exercises. And that's why all of my books contain exercises, because there are so many great self-help books out there. But often, if they don't have exercises in them, we read them and then get on with our lives, and we haven't shaped ourselves differently, really, because we haven't practiced, we haven't done the exercises, we haven't gone to that physical and metaphysical level of looking at how can we reprogram our thoughts, our behaviors, our emotions, so that they're working for us, so that they're more in touch with the divine, which is just such this gorgeous energy. And that's a big part of doing the work, is being able to have exercises that allow you to practice new behaviors, new ways of thinking, letting go of things that don't serve you and creating ones that do.
Because when you change your perspective, everything changes. There's sort of an alchemical joke, and it took me a while to get it. And it is that, say you go into a white room, it's all filled with white light, white objects, but you're with someone who believes that it's blue. There's nothing that you can do to make them see that it's not blue until they change their minds or their perspective.
Absolutely. And that is where so many relationships get into like a power struggle without people realizing this person's here saying, this is my opinion. This person's here saying, this is my opinion. The room's white, the room's blue. No, the room's white, it's blue. Well, That won't work. It'll just create a power struggle. And indeed, the room may be yellow. It may be white. But until there's a willingness and an openness to create a union of perspectives,
And
learning.
that's what I say. If you need to love someone enough so you can agree to disagree and
Mhm.
not argue about points. You
Yes.
validate each other's points, but you don't fight about it.
No, it's you don't want to. I'm not a believer in fighting at all. I'm a believer that it's okay to disagree. It's okay to have different perspectives, and that's why I'm big and I teach readers how to do it in the Joy of Imperfect Love. That's why I believe in reflective listening so much, mirroring, because it is the art of hearing someone else's perspective and allowing it to be, even if it's unhealthy. And as long as we're standing in our truth and standing with our truth and our genuine perspective, if they are a growth oriented individual, and that is the key piece, we need to have two people who are growth oriented, then that listening alone helps create shifts.
I agree. So I wanted you to tell us about your cards that you're making.
So I am so excited. They're actually on the templates on the shelf behind me, but they look very much, the cover looks very much like the cover of my book, The Joy of Imperfect Love. And what I found, the reason I developed the cards is some people really love reading and going through a self-help book and doing all the exercises. Some people prefer little gentle uplifts, little gentle insights. And so the Imperfect Love reflection and oracle cards are based on key pieces from the book, but they allow you just to, one side of the card is just more of a vibration energy to see where your, maybe where your mindset is, or your energies, or your thoughts. And then to be able to go flip the card and go to the side where there's actually a saying and then a prompt. And the saying might be something like, do you feel okay being imperfect in your life? And how does that feel to you? Might be the prompt. The other, or there may be one that says, how are you using your energy on a day-to-day basis to make tiny shifts in your world? Little prompts that you can use to, takes 3 seconds to read them, but you can spend a minute reflecting and journaling. You can spend 5 minutes. You can put it in your mind and sleep on it. And I really believe that when we put something into the mind, into the psyche, and say, okay, universe, work on this with me,
Mhm.
it'll work itself out. And that's why I believe in reflection and oracle cards, because we can plant that seed in the psyche and then the psyche starts doing its work. It's just amazing.
Yeah, because I thought of two things with that. One is when someone tells you that you're doing something wrong, and it may be true, but you immediately feel like, oh, I'm so imperfect, I'm wrong, and I can't do anything about this, and they don't love me anymore. Like those are thoughts that go through your mind. But if you say that love is imperfect, then so what? That just happens.
It does just happen because so many people spend so much energy trying to cover up their imperfections. And some people go to the level of lying to cover up their imperfections. And then you have to keep track of the lies and the stories you've told. Instead, if we just realize that one of the best things we can do is to say, I'm sorry I goofed up,
Hmm.
mistake. Or, okay, you see, and that's if we truly believe we did make a mistake, right?
Right.
If we've made an error. But other times, as you said earlier, sometimes it's just a matter of perspectives
Yeah.
that I'm sitting here, you're sitting here. And as I often, tell people, I'll hold up something like this and I'll say, what are you seeing in this bottle? And
Hmm.
they'll say, oh, I'm seeing a label that says lemongrass. And I'll say, oh, no, you're wrong. This is just an example because I would never
Right.
talk that way to someone. And they'll say, what do you mean I'm wrong? And this is especially good with couples. And I'll say, well, I'm seeing an ingredient label. Why?
Right.
Because we are two people with different perspectives. One bottle two perspectives. So no one is truly wrong. It's just we're sitting in different places, observing two different things. And that is the result, not with the bottle, but in life, it's the result of our history. It's the
Hmm.
fact that based on our personal history, we're bringing a different perspective to the table. And so if we can lean in, what is the antidote to that? And this is one of the cards really invites you to lean into being curious.
Hmm.
Instead of getting argumentative with someone, be curious about their perspective. Well, what are you seeing? Oh, well, I'm seeing a sign that says lemongrass. Oh, where are you sitting? Right? What caused you to see that? Oh, well, I'm sitting over here. I'm seeing the ingredient sign. Oh, no wonder we're seeing two different things. And when we use that as a template to say, oh, this person's coming from an entirely different life, different childhood, different job experience, different relationship experience. Maybe my wisest step is just to be curious about where they're sitting in the room.
Yeah, I had a friend who's a chiropractor, and for years, at the end of her voicemail message, she would say, "Stay curious." And I noticed after listening to that for a long time, I would immediately think, what should I be curious about? Life is so complex and there's so many different weavings of life. What should I be curious about? And that was strange to me that for so many years, I always had that same reaction.
It's the curiosity piece. And again, we can credit society with often indoctrinating us to not be curious,
Right.
right? Sit in your chair, don't ask questions, do the right thing, buy this product because we're telling you it will work, do this, do that. We forget to be curious about, well, what would happen if I raised my hand? What would happen if I crossed over the yellow line or colored outside the lines? What would happen if I say no to that advertisement? What would happen if I wore my funky pants outside with the holes all in them and just did that because it felt good? And
Mhm.
generally, unless we're doing something that's not legal, generally the results of just being ourselves are amazing. Sometimes people don't even notice or care when we realize just being yourself is the greatest gift, and being your best self, really taking it a notch up, and being your best self when you stop caring about. I remember one time I was on a trip long ago when I was dating and I was picking up litter from the beach, and the person I was with said, "Oh, no, don't pick up litter from the beach. What will other people think?" And I looked at him and said, I don't care what other people think. I'm picking up litter from the beach to save the wildlife and help save the planet. If other people think that's gross, that's their problem. And when we all do something little like that, that makes it like, wait, this is me being me. And if that's too much for you, then we are not a good fit.
Yeah, and I say that I don't pick my friends, the universe picks them for me. If boundaries are trampled on or things are going wrong and it's consistent, I'm just like, okay, the universe doesn't want me to be friends with this person now. That's okay, I'll let go of it. But those things that you're talking about, doing things that would be out of the ordinary or that we're curious about, we say in metaphysics that you're learning to discern who you are and who you aren't.
Absolutely. And as we learn to discern who we are and who we aren't, it's much like going to a buffet. And we don't realize that the buffet of life, we taste something and we go, oh, this is good. This carrot stick is amazing. I want more of these. We taste something that's pickled maybe or too sweet and go, oh, no, no, that's too sweet. I don't want that. We have the same right and responsibility to do that with ourselves, but we're not taught that.
Exactly.
Life is this gorgeous buffet where we absolutely can go through it and say, oh, this experience feels good. I want more of that. Oh, this experience doesn't feel good. This person feels good. Let's leave. Oh, no, that person doesn't feel good. They looked good, but now it's good, right? And that's healthy. That's good. We just want to be really mindful of that process so that we don't keep picking up something, tasting it over and over again,
Yeah.
and hoping it'll be different.
and saying, how can I make this work? Well, you don't. You go on and you try something else and you stay curious. So we're coming to the end, and I want to thank you so much, Carla, for being with us. Why don't you tell our listeners the name of your book and your website so they can find you?
Thank you. So you can find me at Dr. Carla Manly, MANLY.com. Same handles for Facebook, Dr. Carla Manly, Instagram, Dr. Carla Manly, LinkedIn, all of the usual places. My book, my most recent one, is The Joy of Imperfect Love, The Art of Creating Healthy, Securely Attached Relationships. And on my website, you can find my other books, including, I really love this one, Aging Joyfully. It helps us look at the aging process and change our roles and really move into more of the person we want to be. My first book, the one I mentioned earlier, is Joy from Fear, Create the Life of Your Dreams by Making Fear Your Friend. That's a really sweet
We're
book.
going to have to close now.
Okay,
All
that's it.
right. So I'm going to say goodbye to everyone and thank you for tuning in to the Power of Inspiration Awakening. Come and find me at One True Self, onetrueself.com. And thank you so much for being with us. Namaste.
Thank you for listening to the Power of Inspiration and Awakening Radio with Julia Griffin to master a higher frequency for a new state of mind. Join us next time as Julia takes us deeper into the memory of the moments of light where transcendence and enlightenment emerge. The memory of the jewel of consciousness is always lived within you to tap into waves of energy and create huge changes by imagining the beauty of the vision and desires that are hidden in the heart. Learn to find your way back to nature, beauty, and your own heart, which holds the secrets of your existence and future. To discover more about Julia's adventures, animal communication, and the teachings she brings to every show, visit onetrueself.com. That's onetrueself.com. That's ONE, trueself.com.